Hey there, Internet people. Welcome back to Green Wing Gaming, or welcome if you're new. If you're a returning viewer, you already know the drill, but for you newbies, this is a Monday upload, and on Mondays, we like to talk about Warhammer stuff. So today, we are finishing out our faction focus on the Dark Angels in 10th edition. Now, originally, this was actually only supposed to be a 4-part series. I didn't think there was going to be enough material for a 5th video, but I did notice that in the way I organized these videos, there were a couple things that ended up not really getting talked about, which normally I would just say whatever and move on, except some of this stuff is actually genuinely pretty cool. Namely, we left out 4 named characters that are neither Deathwing nor Ravenwing, but oddly enough are actually some of the coolest stuff in the new index, which is a bit odd. I say that because, well, we're talking about characters that traditionally have been mishandled by Games Workshop, at least in terms of the gameplay. The lore behind these characters has always been pretty top-notch, but the gameplay rules for them is like Games Workshop couldn't quite figure out how to make them work or how to make them relevant. And oddly enough, they seem to have finally done that. They are bright spots that they finally got right in an index that I feel they have largely otherwise gotten wrong. So it seemed weird to mention the negative, but not bring up the positive. I like to try and stay more positive when it comes to Warhammer, so that's what we're going to be talking about. We're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Inner Circle, what it is, and what it means, and kind of what the ulterior missions of the Ravenwing and the Deathwing are. Because we mentioned both of those groups, but it feels a little incomplete to not mention what their other obligations are. And so that's going to be a bit about what we're talking about today. It's going to have a little bit more to do with the lore, and I like the idea that we're finishing out same way we began it. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so before we get into all of that, I would just like to remind you guys that this YouTube channel is very young. I am just getting started out, and so at this point, anything you guys can do to help with the engagement already does me a big favor. I mean, you even just clicking on this video, you've done me a huge solid. But if I could dare ask for just a little bit more, watching this video all the way to the end really does help with the algorithm. The more hours watched this channel has, the more likes it has, the more subscribers it has. It all helps with the algorithm to get this in front of more people. And because I do have the aspiration of maybe one day doing this full time. Who knows if that'll go anywhere, but I'd like to try. And so, yeah, if you guys could help me out at all with that, I would really appreciate it. Also, leaving comments, I don't know how much it actually helps with the algorithm, but I genuinely would like to hear what you guys have to say about this stuff. Have I done an okay job breaking down the Dark Angels? Have I not? I would love to know your thoughts. So, with all that self-promotion out of the way, that in case you couldn't tell, it still makes me super uncomfortable. With all that out of the way, we're talking about the Inner Circle, we're talking about the commanders of the chapter, so let's just get into it. Okay, so we're talking about the Inner Circle right now, and to give you an idea of what the Inner Circle is, the Inner Circle actually doesn't begin with 40k, it doesn't even begin with 30k, it actually, the concept of the Inner Circle for the Dark Angels predates the Dark Angels. It is something that hails back to a knightly order back on Old Caliban, which, again, is the now destroyed homeworld of the Dark Angels. But we're not going to go that far back in the lore because, again, that's kind of a lot. We'd be here all day. But the Inner Circle, in modern 40k terms, is the actual governing body of the Dark Angels chapter. And that might sound a little bit weird because, well, Space Marine chapters typically run on a very rigid chain of command. You've got sergeants, lieutenants, captains, chapter master. You've got reclusiarchs and all that good chain of command stuff. And yes, the Dark Angels do have that, officially anyway. Behind the curtains, things are not so simple. So you'll recall, if you watch the first video in this series, that the Dark Angels are strongly motivated by the fact that at the end of the Horus Heresy, fully half of their legion turned traitor. Well, ever since then, they've been trying to catch the half that turned traitor, and the Inner Circle are the people they're the organization guiding the chapter towards that goal. And as far as they are concerned, that mission supersedes everything else. It is more important than the chain of command. Keeping the chapter guided towards that is more important than anything. More important than the Imperium. Like, if you had to ask a member of the Inner Circle, would you rather catch all the Fallen or revive the Emperor of Mankind? They'd have to think about it, and then they'd probably choose catching the Fallen. It really is that big of a deal for them. They have been locked into a generational sense of grieving for what happened, and it motivates pretty much every waking thought of the Inner Circle. And while, yes, on a day-to-day basis, Azrael, the chapter master, is the one calling the shots, whenever there is a matter of the Great Hunt, as they call it, whenever an issue related to that comes up, the Inner Circle will have a meeting, and the Inner Circle will actually democratically vote on what to do. People will, they will decide, various members will put forward their ideas, their plans of action, and then they'll vote on whose plan they're going to follow. And Azrael gets a vote, sure, but just one vote, and he has been outvoted in the past. And if a person decides not to abide by that vote, or if they have failed in some catastrophic fashion, that maybe they deliberately chose to save a planet instead of hunting the Fallen, or they just straight up let a Fallen get away, it could be possible that the Inner Circle might decide that either the chapter master or the Master of Sanctity, someone needs to not be in their position of power anymore. However, how do you explain that to the galaxy as a whole, the Imperium, even the uninitiated members of the chapter? How do you tell them? The answer is you don't. If a sitting chapter master or other high-ranking officer is voted out of office by the Inner Circle, his successor will take on the behind-the-scenes role, and that former member of the Inner Circle will be expected to get himself killed. He will be expected to lead every forlorn hope, every desperate attack, every hopeless cause. He's expected to be at the front of it until it kills him. And if he doesn't do that, well, then one day he's just going to meet with a tragic training accident. And that is how, even by 40K standards, that's pretty grim. That's how dedicated these guys are to the collective is everything. The individual means nothing. It's like I said, very unusual for Space Marines and pretty grim even by the standards of the grim dark future of the 41st millennium. But what does all this mean for the Ravenwing and the Deathwing? Well, like I said, I think I mentioned this earlier, I might not have, but if you're new to the Dark Angels, well, everything is secrets within secrets, circles within circles, lies within lies, if we're being honest. And what that has to do with the Ravenwing and the Deathwing is, well, both of those formations, while being a valuable part of the chapter and their order of battle, also have ulterior objectives. Like I said, everything is about hunting the Fallen, right? The traitor Dark Angels. So the Ravenwing are the ones responsible with actually finding the Fallen, with actually tracking them down, and they've retconned it a couple times now, so I'm not sure exactly how the order of this goes, but certain members of the Ravenwing are more informed as to the truth of their mission than others. The Ravenwing is sort of how you get groomed to see if you're ready to be part of the Inner Circle. And oddly enough, it ends up drawing in the most creative minds, if such a word can apply to a Space Marine. The most creative minds of the chapter, because you have to hunt the Fallen and do so without alerting the Imperium to their existence. You have to think outside the box, and many of their officers have actually do become quite capable investigators. If they weren't so busy hiding things from the Inquisition, they could be a tremendous asset to the Inquisition. And so the Ravenwing, even their rank and file members might be aware that they're hunting someone that has wronged the chapter, someone that knows something they shouldn't, but really only the Black Knights and Samael himself, in the Ravenwing at least, are aware of the Fallen and exactly what they're hunting. And so typically it will be the Black Knights who will actually make the grab. They will actually, like, be the one to run down that member of the Fallen, while the rest of the Raven Wing is there to support that mission. And once the Black Knights have cornered a member of the Fallen, typically that's when the Deathwing comes in, because the Deathwing are all initiated members of the Inner Circle. They know what they're hunting, they know exactly what they're hunting, and while they may not know all of the little details, they know enough. They know that these are traitor Dark Angels. They might not know exactly what happened all those millennia ago, but they know enough. And so the Deathwing are kind of the enforcers of the Inner Circle. But it actually goes even a little bit deeper than that, because aside from being the iron fist of the chapter's order of battle, aside from being the ones to actually physically apprehend the Fallen so that they can be dragged back to their floating planetoid fortress, the Deathwing, the reason that they are the only ones allowed to have Terminator armor is a bit grim. The Inner Circle views keeping this knowledge away from the rest of the chapter not as a privilege of leadership, but rather as a burden. That, this information distresses them greatly. It causes them a lot of heartbreak and anger, and they view keeping this secret from their brothers as a mercy, as we are allowing you to live out your lives not having to know this stuff. And pretty early on in a Space Marine's career in the Dark Angels, it will be determined whether or not this person might ever be ready to know. And if you're not, well, then you're probably just never going to find out. If you are showing an ability to ask questions and think, and maybe if you respond well to certain hypno-indoctrination and certain kind of fables that are told to you, you might get to know some of the truth one day. But the thing that terrifies the Inner Circle the most, aside from being discovered by the Inquisition and having their shame revealed to the galaxy, their greatest fear is that if this could happen to the Legion, it could happen to now in 40k to the chapter. That one day a member of the Fallen or somebody else could potentially morally compromise the chapter. And so the Inner Circle and their enforcers, the Deathwing, have steps in place, or they have plans in place to purge the chapter if they ever believe they can no longer trust their brothers. And so the Deathwing, being armed with all the best weapons and all the best armor, and knowing a bunch of secrets that the other Dark Angels don't, are in a position where they could eradicate the rest of the chapter. And to that end, the Inner Circle has literally even stockpiled massive banks of gene seed in hidden caches all over the galaxy. Because if they ever do have to purge the chapter, well, so they're going to need a bunch of gene seed to replace their dead brothers. Except if they ask the High Lords of Terra for that gene seed, well, the High Lords are going to want to know why that happened, and the Dark Angels aren't going to have a good answer for them. So they need hidden gene seed. And that's that to me is just peak Dark Angels. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it there in terms of talking about the Inner Circle, what they do. We've now covered kind of the ulterior functions of the Raven Wing and the Deathwing. This is probably my favorite part about the Dark Angels. This is the part that has fascinated me for so long. I find it really just captivating in terms of storytelling. Hopefully, I've spread that to you guys just a little bit, although please trust that I have done a very amateur job of explaining all of this. If there is more you want to know, there are plenty of good books to read about it. Angels of Darkness is a fantastic novel. It is sort of a prelude to the Unforgiven trilogy by Gav Thorpe. He wrote a trilogy of books called Raven Wing. The middle book is Master of Sanctity, and I think the third book is even called The Unforgiven. And those three books are amazing at demonstrating the nature of the Inner Circle and what they do. But anyways, I will leave it at that. We have now covered enough of the lore. Hopefully, I've gotten you interested in this most secretive part of the Dark Angels. But next, we are going to launch into talking about some of their members and how fascinating they are. Because like I said, in the intro to all of this, they actually got these guys right for a change. So we're going to talk about the the highest ranking members of the Dark Angels in just a second. Okay, so we're talking about the named characters in the Dark Angels chain of command, and as I've said, the whole reason we're even filming this video is not even necessarily that these characters are now, like, super OP or anything. I'm not saying they're, like, going to be the most game-changing competitive stat lines, but Games Workshop has finally taken, you know, a couple of named characters that are amazing in the lore and actually given them stat sheet lines that actually make any amount of sense and might actually make you want to take them in a game of 40k. Because if I'm being honest with you, of the four characters I'm about to mention, two of them you just straight up never took, and one of them, his 9th edition datasheet, he just was not what people wanted from him, and as again, you kind of didn't want to take him because he just didn't do what you expected he would. But anyways, well, we're gonna get there, but we're gonna start off talking about the, oddly enough, actually not the head chaplain, but the Master of Repentance, Asmodai. Despite common misconception, he's actually not the head chaplain of the Dark Angels. There was another chaplain named Safan, who's the Master of Sanctity, and he is the actual Reclusiarch, and he used to have a model in older editions of 40k, but for whatever reason, he no longer gets a model, and Asmodai does. Not real sure what's up with that, but eh. But the weird thing was that for a long time, Asmodai, like, you just never took him. He was one of those characters that Games Workshop just always got wrong, and that you would take one look at his data sheet and say, yeah, nope, not using him for this edition either. Because, like, at least in 8th edition, he handed out reroll hit rolls and a bubble of +1 attack, which admittedly was kind of interesting. But compared to, like, he cost so much more than a regular chaplain that you were just like, okay, why don't I just take a regular chaplain and still get the reroll hit rolls? Yeah, he was just one of those guys that you know, you never took him because he didn't do anything particularly interesting. And now, even now, he's probably not like a super OP character, but he does. Well, first of all, let's start with his stat line. He's got a pretty standard stat line: 6-inch move, tough 4, 2 up armor, 4 up invulnerable, OC of 1, leadership 5+. He's literally the only character in the Dark Angels line that has a 5-up leadership. He literally has better leadership than Azrael, the chapter master, which I think is a little weird, but whatever. Okay, cool. He has an ability that called Exemplar of Hate. If he joins a Space Marine unit, they get to reroll melee attacks. I personally think that's just what chaplains should do already, but the fact that he has it is pretty interesting. He also has a rule that says in every fight phase, any enemy unit that has a character in it within 6 inches of his unit has to take a battle shock check at -1. Right away, that's actually pretty interesting. That could be pretty clutch if you're fighting like a really scary enemy melee unit and you think your opponent is gonna use some pretty bomb-ass stratagems on them. Like, for example, if you make them fail that battle shock check at the start of the fight phase, your opponent can't interrupt with the scary unit. So you can charge them without being super scared of getting interrupted. So Asmodai does, right off the bat, have some really interesting combos. The reroll hit rolls, the ability to potentially freeze up enemy units. Right away, that's pretty cool. He's just got a regular bolt pistol for shooting, which is kind of disappointing, but his melee is probably the thing I'm happiest about, because Asmodai has a weapon called the Blades of Reason that Games Workshop has gotten wrong in every edition. It is a garbage weapon that no one ever used, because you had to use it instead of his Crozius, and why would you ever? Its stat line is objectively worse, and so it was kind of annoying that here's like this super cool fluffy thing that you're never gonna use, and it just didn't make a lot of sense. So now the Blades of Reason are actually kind of interesting. Not amazingly interesting, but interesting. They've got the extra attacks rule. So right away, that's a bonus. It's basically giving him an extra 3 attacks, because that's the amount of attacks the weapon gets. So like I said, pretty interesting, and the fact that he can still use his Crozius to full effect and get the benefit of the Blades of Reason, really interesting. Now, the Blades of Reason are also anti-character 2+, so he's targeting a character he's basically auto-wounding. Or wounding on a 2+, but that's really solid, considering the weapon is only strength 4. Another bonus is the fact that it has the precision rule, so he can just, if he's in a combat with another character, he can target that character no matter what. Your opponent can't shrug those attacks off on someone else. So no matter what, he's got a 2+. He's hitting characters and wounding them on a 2+. Really solid. If you can join him with another unit that could potentially provide, like a librarian or something that could provide devastating wounds, that could get even more interesting. I'd have to look at what other characters could join the same unit as him. It'd probably just be like a firstborn lieutenant or maybe a firstborn apothecary, but I'll have to take a look. But my point is, he can actually now be somewhat scary in melee. You know, hitting on a 2+, re-rolling hit rolls, anti-character 2+. It can all be really... Now, the Blades of Reason are still AP nothing, damage 1, but another part of his rule, the one that forces morale checks, is that if he does the final blow against a character, you get a command point. So, like, it all synergizes reasonably well. He rerolls to hit in melee. He has extra attacks in melee. He's good at hurting characters in melee, and if he hurts them, you can get command points. Really good synergy that was sorely missing from previous data sheets. Is he OP? Not at all. Is he worth taking? Yeah, could be. Which is an upgrade. So I'll take my wins where I can get them. Next up, we have the Chief Librarian of the Dark Angels, and that is a fellow called Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel has always been kind of a question mark in the Dark Angels, because, like, in the lore, he's this god-tier psyker who's, like, one of the most powerful figures in the universe, and yet we, like, never hear about him. And it's always really confused me, because he's supposedly so good at what he does and so, like, amazing, and we should all be super afraid of him. But then he's just kind of, like, in the background, has never really had, like, a really cool lore moment. His data sheet has never been particularly interesting. And even now, his data sheet is not amazing, but there's still at least, like, kind of a reason to take him. And again, he has a pretty standard librarian loadout with, like, the fact that he's basically just a librarian who has a 4-up invulnerable save in terms of his stat line. You know, 3-up armor save, OC of 1, tough 4, move 6. You know the deal. But he hands out a psychic buff that says, or actually it's not really a buff, it's a psychic nerf that says, once per shooting phase, he can pick an enemy unit within 18 inches. They have to take a battle shock test. Right away, kind of interesting. He can buff shooting units, although the only shooting unit he can join is a tactical squad. Everything else, it's like a command squad, assault squad, or Vanguard vets, which is a little weird, but eh. And so, yeah, he's still a little weird, but he also has a war gear option that just gives him his unit +1 attack, which, again, that would feel more appropriate on Asmodai, but it's something. And so now I could still see, like, putting him in with a squad of Assault Marines, giving them +1 attack, and the Assault Marines now can have their whole unit ability is the ability to choose like 3 different abilities. They can have Lance. They can have, I think, Twin Link. They can have 3 different abilities to choose from, and mixing them up with Ezekiel, giving them, a +1 attack, and handing out buffs, or debuffs to enemy units in the shooting phase. Yeah, you could battle shock a unit in the shooting phase and then charge in, and they're not able to be targeted by stratagems. Sort of the same deal with Asmodai. His bolt pistol is kind of interesting in that it's AP 1 damage 2 and has precision, but it's still only strength 4, so it's kind of interesting, but not super interesting. His sword is strength 6, D3 damage, psychic, anti-chaos 2+, which I'm really not a fan of because it's so situational. But it does. No, it doesn't have devastating wounds because his other psychic power has devastating wounds, and what that is just that he has a power called Mind Wipe, which is a one-shot ranged attack at strength 6, but it has precision and devastating wounds. So you can target a unit that's part of target a character that's part of a unit, go straight to them, wound them on if you roll a 6+ to wound, you cause D3 mortal wounds instead of just D3 damage on a failed saving throw. So that could be really interesting. Or even if you just want to do D3 mortal wounds to the squad, that could still be interesting. Again, not necessarily super OP, but at least, hey, it's a librarian with some really interesting psychic powers that could potentially hand out a lot of debuffs and buffs to your own guys. So again, Asmodai and Ezekiel, not necessarily competitive data sheets, but now they at least make sense. They at least line up with, oh yeah, a super fight crazed chaplain, a super psychic heavy librarian. They actually do things more than what their counterparts do. So I'm pretty happy with those. And then the next data sheet isn't necessarily a buffed data sheet. It's one that kind of got a lateral move. He's not any worse really, but he's not. I guess I will say he could be a little bit better. But we are talking now about Azrael, the chapter master of the Dark Angels. A while ago, I would have referred to him as the big man. Except if you guys have been paying attention to the lore recently, he is no longer the big man in the Dark Angels. But yeah, and so Azrael is now a Primaris chapter master, has been since the end of 9th. And so he has a stat line that makes sense with that. Again, 6-inch move, toughness 4, 6 wounds, 2 up armor, 4 up invulnerable, OC of 1, leadership 6+, which again, little weird that his leadership is worse than the chaplain's, but whatever. We're just gonna breeze right past that. Well, first of all, the thing that makes him so interesting is he just automatically gives you a command point at the start of your command phase. So at the start of your command phase, when you would normally get a command point, no, you're getting 2. Yeah, that's really solid. That's just genuinely really solid. In 10th edition, command points are going to be comparatively hard to come by, so him handing out so many more is really useful. He also, any unit he joins he hands them out sustained hits, which also means he gives himself sustained hits, because if he gives it to the unit, he gives it to himself. So his shooting and melee options are, initially when you look at them, they might not look that impressive, but the more I looked at his data sheet, the more impressed I was with Azrael, because, he can join Primaris units, the only one of these named characters who can. So he can join, a Stern Guard Veteran Squad, or Intercessors, or Hellblasters, or Blade Guard, or Assault Intercessors, and all of these units he could give a bonus to, because he hands out he has a helmet called the Lion Helm, which gives him a once per game ability to have a 4-up shrug against mortal wounds. He can summon a Watcher in the dark and gain for the rest of the turn, gain a 4-up shrug against mortal wounds. But it also gives both himself and his entire unit a 4-up invulnerable save. Now, that's a little bit of a weird one, because I would probably want to put this guy in with Blade Guard veterans, except they already have a 4-up invulnerable, so it feels like he's not really handing out the maximized buffs he could. Although, again, still giving them sustained hits, still pretty solid. But it's the part where he actually might be more interesting as buffing a shooting unit, because he could, join a squad of Hellblasters, give them a 4-up invulnerable, and give them sustained hits on their plasma weapons. So, yeah, that could be insanely good. But the point with Azrael is that there's just a lot of, interesting, weird quirks of what he could do. Because the more I thought about it, even putting him in with an Infernus squad, which he can join, you might think, why bother? He's not giving... The sustained hits doesn't help them at all, because they're auto-hitting. Yeah, but he gives them a 4-up invulnerable, and Infernus units, to do what they do, need to get close to the enemy. You know, one of the best things I've seen them do so far in the edition is get up close, and when your opponent tries to move close to you, in their movement phase, hit them with Overwatch. They no longer have to be the target of a charge to Overwatch. Well, so now they can rock up, you Overwatch them in the movement phase, and they think, oh, cool, I got Overwatch out of the way, now I'll charge them. Except if they do, they're now fighting Azrael, who, with his 6 attacks, with anti-infantry 4+, and devastating wounds, means that if he rolls a 4+ to wound, he's just causing 2 mortal wounds, because he's got a 2 damage sword, that's AP 4. So, yeah, his strength 6, AP 4, damage 2, with precision, sustained hits, devastating wounds, anti-infantry 4+. Oh, sorry, no, the anti-infantry does not apply to his sword. That applies to his gun, which, to be fair, does still have 3 shots. And so again, sustained hits, anti-infantry 4+ with devastating wounds, 2 AP minus 3, yeah, AP minus 3, and damage 2. So again, his gun, another reason to put him in with like intercessors or hellblasters, because his shooting is actually not terrible. But his sword does still have devastating wounds. It just doesn't have the 4+ ability, the anti-infantry 4+ ability. But still, devastating wounds, giving himself sustained hits. Yeah, this guy can be a real beatstick in melee. He can hand out a bunch of mortal wounds. He can hand out a bunch of abilities, and he can actually join your Primaris beatsticks. Although even there, I do kind of wish he could join like Terminators or join like aggressors with their giving their power fists sustained hits, to say nothing of their bolt gauntlets. But he can't. So and that's just something we're gonna have to live with. But my point is, he's really interesting and hasn't really lost any of his potency. So again, Azrael, a character that has been, at least in like 7th and 8th edition, he was kind of a weird choice. And now his data sheet's still pretty solid. Still, I would argue, still pretty good for his points. I am gonna miss the 6-inch bubble of 4-up invulnerable, but it is what it is. We kind of knew that was going away in 10th edition with the way characters are now joining units rather than just aura buffing them. But yeah, so all 3 of these characters, I think, with Ezekiel and Asmodai, definitely a glow up, definitely better. Azrael, maybe more of a lateral move. But I'm pretty happy with them in general, and I'm talking like the video is over. It's not. We still have one guy left to talk about, and in fact, I'm so excited to talk about it, I've literally got my laptop set up over here just to talk about this dude, because I don't trust myself to not get so giddy that I forget what his data sheet does. Literally, I'm just so pumped about this. The Lion has returned. The big man himself. We now get a Primarch. And I know he came back in 9th edition, but his data sheet in 9th edition, both myself and a lot of other Dark Angels fans were maybe not crazy about it, because literally all he did was he was a beatstick in melee. He could reroll charges for himself when he deep struck, and he was good in melee. That's it. That was really all he did. Now, he's still a beatstick in melee, mind you. Like, he's still really solid in melee, but he's a lot better. He's a lot more durable, and B, actually like does a decent job of buffing Dark Angels like a Primarch should. So, running through his stats real quick: 8-inch move, lightning fast dude. He's toughness 9, 2+ armor, 3-up invulnerable save. It's one of the only 3-ups in the game. 10 wounds, leadership 5+, an OC of 4. He is a monster, so he can't, and I don't just mean like in terms of his stats, like he has the monster keyword, so he can't join any units, but he does have lone operative. So yeah, that's pretty. As long as he stays close to a Dark Angels unit, he's got the lone operative ability. Yeah, as long as he stays close to infantry. His shield now actually does something. In 9th edition, it was completely useless, but now it gives him -1 to be wounded. So he's toughness 9 and -1 to be wounded. Las cannons are hurting this dude on 4s. Anything that's strength 8 or less is wounding him on 6s. which is kind of insane. This guy is crazy durable with a 2-up, 3-up, and -1 to wound at T9. The Lion is every bit as beefy as he should be. Again, his sword just does all the damage in the world with a bajillion attacks. His plasma pistol, I don't even know why they bothered giving it to him. No one's ever going to remember to use it. Yeah, and then, but we're not going to focus too much on his melee stats because, yeah, they're amazing, but, you know, that's probably not surprising. His shooting is, unsurprisingly, not amazing. But his 3 Primarch abilities are really what I want to talk to you guys about. And this is the part that I brought up his datasheet for, so excuse me while I'm looking at this. Because the way this works is at the start of your command phase, he can pick one of these 3 abilities and turn them on for the rest of the battle round. So the first one is All Secrets Revealed. Once per turn, when your opponent targets a unit from their army with a stratagem, but before that stratagem's effects are resolved, that unit must, first of all, if you gain a CP. What this amounts to is, if once per turn, if your enemy unit within 12 is the target of a strat, you get a CP. Your opponent spends their CP, and you gain 1. On top of that, the unit being targeted by the stratagem has to make a battle shock test. If they fail, the stratagem doesn't work, and they count as battle shocked. So your opponent could be going to buff their unit with a strat, and instead they've just battle shocked their own unit. That could be really clutch. That could be really interesting. Particularly the fact that he doesn't even have to be in melee with them. It could just be anything within 12 of him. It's not that hard to get guys within 12 these days, particularly with how fast he moves. Yeah, you're going to get this guy into the enemy lines pretty much guaranteed, and then potentially, your own opponent is giving you command points, and on top of that, you're potentially making his strat not work. Because if that opposing unit fails the battle shock test, they just don't get the strat, and the command points are still spent. So your opponent could let off, could potentially try to spend a 2 CP to interrupt. The 2 CP are gone, you get a CP, and then he might just not get the interrupt. Like, oh, thanks for giving me a CP, losing 2, and achieving nothing. Potentially devastating. Kind of situational, but potentially devastating. The next ability that he could choose is just Martial Exemplar Aura. While a friendly Adeptus Astartes unit is within 6 inches of this model, it can get +1 to hit. Yeah. A 6-inch aura of +1 to hit. That's pretty solid. At least I think so. So now all of a sudden, all of your charging Deathwing stuff is hitting on 2s, where it might have been hitting on 3s. Or in the case of Thunderhammers and Power Fist, you're hitting on 3s instead of 4s. Huge buff to your melee units. So it makes sense that and that kind of makes sense that the Lion on a turn when he's charging with all of his Deathwing by his side is making them hit noticeably better. Yeah. And then No Hiding from the Watchers is the Lion's last Primarch ability. It's another aura ability with, it says, while a friendly Adeptus Astartes unit is within 6 inches of this model, they have a Feel No Pain 4+ against mortal wounds. And every Psyker army in the game just shouted out in agony. Anyone that can dish out mortal wounds is furious about this ability. That's just really strong, and again, the fact that it's an aura, a 6-inch aura of just, hey, I ignore half of all mortal wounds. Really scary. A lot of enemy units that are like, oh yeah, we've buffed our guys to the 9s with devastating wounds, and those wounds are popping on a 4+. Yeah, no, I'm just ignoring them. Yeah, the Lion is really good. He's a bit pricey at 380 points. I would kind of like to see his point cost come down just a little bit, maybe more like 300 points. But yeah, still a beat stick. Some really unique utility here. I'm just thrilled beyond thrilled that he's back. And like I said, that's a big part of why I made this video. I am stoked about these named characters. I am pumped that he's coming. You'll notice there was one character I didn't talk about there's a reason. He's garbage, he's useless, and he's always going to be. So we're just not even going to name him. But with that all being said, we have now reached the end of the video. I don't want to gush too much about my Dark Angels. My bias is starting to show. You can tell that I'm a 20-year collector of the Dark Angels. So it's maybe not surprising that I'm like super giddy about the Lion being back and all of these named characters. But with all that being said, thank you so much for making it to the end. And I hope this made you guys excited about the Dark Angels, or at least got you a little bit pumped about their named characters. Let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comments. I would really like to know if you spotted some combos I didn't. If there's something in these data sheets that I didn't quite spot, let me know if I'm missing out on something, or just let me know what you think. I've already had some pretty great conversations with some of you guys in the comments section, and I would like to keep that going. So I would love to hear what you guys think down below. I would love to see you in our videos coming every Monday and Friday. But in the meantime, happy wargaming.
Onward to glory!